There's something about forests that has always unsettled me. Maybe it's the way the trees block out the sky, or how every sound seems distant and distorted once you're far enough in. Looking at a massive forest and imagining myself walking straight into it gives me the same helpless feeling as the bottom of the ocean, or standing at the edge of a high building. It feels wrong, like it's not a place meant for people. The woods are a place where people have disappeared, gotten lost, and never came back at all. Twigs snap, silence falls, and the trees blot out the sky, bringing a thick, heavy darkness with them. Being surrounded by endless trees strips away all your senses of direction, and after a while, you begin to realize something truly disturbing. You never really know what else might be out there with you. As always, remember to follow, like, and comment. Now let's begin. Forests. I'm your host, Michael Messerly, and this is Scary, but True. Something strange happened in Mount Rainier National Park. I wanted to post this here to maybe get some feedback on something that happened while camping in my van in Mount Rainier. The circumstances around what happened are very foggy because I have very limited recollection of what happened, as everything happened in a haze. But I do have pictures that definitely prove that something, whatever it was, did in fact happen. I, 23-year-old man, went to a van life meetup in Enumclaw, Washington over the weekend. The city is close by Mount Rainier National Park, and because I had already made the trip, I figured I might as well camp overnight nearby. I brought some ingredients to make carne asada tacos, downloaded some movies, and was ready for a nice cozy evening in my van, something which I do on most weekends in various campsites around the state. I hiked around the campsite, which was very nice, save for the large amounts of trash which was littered about, which actually made me really sad. The trail led to 2 fire pits not too far from where I had parked, and it ended at a quiet riverbank. It seemed like it was a spot that local teens might go to drink and smoke weed. There was even a log bench with the words 420 painted colorfully on its seat. I wasn't sure how recently people had been there, but there were open half-drinking cans around the fire pits. I decided that it likely wasn't an active campsite, and stayed. The spot wasn't terribly isolated. Every 30 minutes or so, someone would drive by to claim other campsites down the lonely fire road, some trucks and even an RV. People like me looking to spend time out in nature and who don't want to shell out the extra cash for a campsite. After exploring the area, I went back to my van to start making dinner. I used a satellite communicator to check in with my friends and family, as I didn't have any service this deep into the forest. But after eating, and when it was quiet, I started noticing a sound in the distance. They sounded like gunshots, really almost like cannonballs. Deep, rhythmic booms echoing in the valley every few seconds. What accompanied those sounds was a still distant, yet closer noises of a chainsaw in the distance. Now let's be honest, neither of these noises are very uncommon to hear when camping on fire roads. People in Washington love their guns, and it wouldn't be unheard of for someone to use a chainsaw to cut down larger trunks into firewood. I also saw some campers start to leave, including an RV, which was particularly unusual. Finding a campsite for an RV can be hard, but it is especially hard to find one at night. The rule is to always find camp before the sun sets, and the sun had only just disappeared from the sky. Something spooked them, and I wondered if it would be wise to follow their lead. However, I had unwashed dishes on the counter, and I was in no mood to move, and so I didn't. I did, however, triple check that all my doors and windows were locked before drifting to sleep. That night can only be described as hazy and disorienting. I have very little memory of anything that happened, but the evidence that something had most definitely happened was very evident. I remember being awake in the pitch black of night, struggling to breathe, not choking. My lungs were filling with air, but I remember the feeling of drowning. I remember the pleading desperation for air. I remember trying to see with my sight being wholly consumed by the darkness in front of me. I have a memory of trying to punch out a window to no avail. I remember making my way to the side doors of my van to open the door to breathe, and then I woke up in bed and the sun was in the sky. I would have chalked this up to a really bad dream, but there was damage all around me. There was definitely a struggle. Some of my window blinds were sliced and ruined. One of my windows had a scratch mark from the inside. Even the air vent on my ceiling was obliterated from the inside. I didn't think I was even capable of this, and the van was well ventilated, so I'm unsure as to why I would have trouble breathing in the first place. My carbon monoxide detector was silent, and the van was well ventilated after cooking. I have no idea what possibly could have caused me to do this and ruin my lovely van. I saw no indication of any kind of forced entry, and all the damage was done from the inside by me trying to get out, I guess. Pictures were actually provided for this story. I have posted them on my Instagram at ScaryButTruePod, so go take a look for yourself and tell me what you think. Back to the story. My knuckles were very sore, as were my feet, as I probably hit them hard on the various cabinets in the van on my way out. A pole I used to prop up my canopy was strangely out of place in the middle of the floor and broken at the ends. I have never had any form of night terrors or sleepwalking before this, except for one incident, also nearby Mount Rainier National Park. A few months ago, my friends and I were driving through Enumclaw, trying to find a camping spot we might be able to post up at. It was nighttime already, and as I said before, finding camp at night can be pretty difficult. We were driving down the same road I had taken for my recent trip, and we had gotten a tip from a local about a mountain which had some good dispersed camping. We were tired and hungry, and just wanted to start setting up camp. We passed a few spots, mostly mud and rock, none too level and none too appealing. We decided to pick the least muddy spot we could find, and I helped them set up their tents. It was one of my first trips in my van, and I was excited to test it out. As we were setting up camp, we heard the wind blowing ominously through the trees, causing them to creak loudly, threatening us with a fall. And this particular area of the mountain was very unleveled in the most unsettling way, so we thus referred to this campsite as the ominous slant. When we slept that night, a few things of note happened. My friend Melissa claims to have heard squeaking noises as if someone were wearing a latex bodysuit. She refers to the sound as the happy gimper. Kurt, her boyfriend, swears he heard a bear that night. However, the worst of it was when, in the middle of the night, they both heard me yell bloody murder from my van. Kurt rushed out of the tent, tripping a few times in his haste, and rushed over to swing open the doors, but I was asleep. He asked what was wrong, and he thought that someone was attacking me. I had no idea what he was talking about. I have no memory at all of any nightmares preceding it or anything. I have no idea what any of this means. I have been on many trips in the van since with different people, and nothing like this has happened anywhere else. It has only happened when I've been in Mount Rainier National Park. To be honest, thinking about the feeling of drowning in darkness makes me very much not want to revisit the subject anytime soon. So I don't believe I'll be visiting the park at any time in the near future for camping either. If you're enjoying Scary But True, please remember to leave a like, comment, and follow me wherever you're listening, as it really helps me out. Also, leave a rating down below wherever you're listening, as that also helps me out. Thank you so much for listening. Now back to the episode. I had a strange encounter in the woods. To this day, I have no idea what it was. One night, my friend Sam and I decided to go smoke somewhere. I got into his beat-up Ford and we set off. I lived in Vermont, where there was plenty of turnoffs and hidden smoke spots. You just had to look for them to find them. So that night, Sam and I were bored and we decided to go find a new smoke spot. It was one of those nights where you could already tell we were going to be out until at least 3 a.m. Luckily, I had told my parents that I was staying at his house that night, and his mom wasn't really around much and didn't care what time we got back. We left his house around 10:30 and went to the local dealer, picked up some bud, and started driving down the usual back roads we'd lived on our whole lives. We started taking random turns just to go on roads we hadn't been on yet, and after a while, we still weren't making any progress. We were still in high school, so any sign of life or the possibility of a spot having a cop freaked us out and narrowed down our options quite a bit. Eventually, we found ourselves quite literally in the middle of nowhere, just driving down winding back roads. I saw what looked like a spot with some potential, a turnoff with no sign or marking of any kind. We turned up the road in his beat-up white Ford and headed up what appeared to be an access road to some power lines. After a while of driving up this access road, which was just 2 tire tracks separated by some grass, we got to the top. There was a small clearing in a makeshift parking lot where some service vehicles were able to access the power lines. We sat up in the front seat with the car on and the headlights still pointed at the forest while we hit a few bowls from the tube. After a little time, there was a lull in the conversation, and we were both just kind of baked as hell, looking at the forest in front of us lit up by the headlights. Suddenly, Sam sat up from his seat and asked me, "Is that a deer?" I sat up in the front seat and looked out the window at what he was pointing at. From where I was sitting, it looked like a deer resting in the gravel, but it was sitting almost unnaturally. Sam threw the car into gear and pulled up alongside it. We both got out, turned the car off, and pulled out our phone flashlights. We walked over next to it. We realized it was a deer, but not all of it. It was the head and the skin, but there was no meat on it or any blood, just the attached head to the skin. We both kind of just started saying things to each other like, "What the fuck?" as we looked at it for a bit. "Why would a hunter fully clean a deer and just leave the head and the skin?" I said, suddenly feeling a little put off. "I don't know, man," he said as he picked up his stick. He flipped it over, and some strange symbol was carved into the other side of it. It almost looked like a plus sign, except all of the lines were curved and embellished with some strange accent marks. We didn't think to take a picture of it, but in hindsight, we probably should have. Almost right after this, we heard noises coming from down along the power lines. For those of you who don't know, when there are big power lines running through the forest, they clear all of the trees underneath them, which leaves a narrow strip of clearing stretching the length of the power lines. The access road was on a ridgeline of sorts, and the power lines ran perpendicular to the ridge, so we could see all the way down the hill into the valley and then up the other side through the narrow strip of clearing where there weren't any trees. Right after we heard the noises, we turned our flashlights off since both of us assumed it was some service workers about to bust us, because who the hell else would be up here? We both stopped and listened to the sounds for a second. They were pretty distant, so we moved to the edge of the gravel where we could hear them better. We heard the noises getting louder. It sounded like a bunch of people breaking sticks, and all of a sudden we saw 20 to 25 people burst out of the tree line about 100 yards down from us, full on sprinting from tree line to tree line across the clearing. The starlight was bright enough that I could make out the men wearing all black, Amish-looking clothing, but without the hats, and the women wearing all white dresses, holding them above their knees while sprinting across the clearing. We had no idea why they were running, but almost instantaneously, Sam and I had the same idea. We both made a beeline for his car, and Sam peeled out of the gravel parking spot and headed back down toward the access road. We both just started laughing at the insanity of what we had just seen. At this point, we must have been doing 60 down this barely marked road when, out of nowhere, in a split second, I saw two shining dots in front of us, then huge yellow eyes, and then this massive silhouette that filled the whole windshield. Then, bang! We both audibly screamed. Sam slammed on the brakes and screamed, "Was that a fucking owl?" I just remember screaming, "We are not stopping, go, go, go." We made it back onto the main road and then back to his house at around 2:30 a.m. We smoked some more and just talked about what the fuck we had just seen. To this day, we still talk about it, and neither of us knows exactly what we saw. Were those people running towards something or away from something? No idea. Although it doesn't really make much sense, we both feel like the owl was related to what we saw. We just don't know how. The hitchhiker that almost murdered me. It was a hot summer day. I'd gone for a hike and got seriously lost, which is another story. Suffice it to say that I had hiked through trackless wilderness for mile after mile, and even when I found a road, I was so far from a car, I didn't know which direction to go. Dead tired, exhausted, and still several miles back to the car. Finally, I was on the way home late afternoon on a sunny, hot day, after many hours lost in the mountains and woods. It was about 15 miles to home, and I live out in the country. As I started into the drive, I saw an overweight, out-of-shape fellow hitchhiking in the direction I was going. I saw that he had a long, hard walk in front of him, just like I had completed just only 20 minutes ago. Of course, I felt sorry for the fella, having a similar ordeal as I just had, and I stopped and I motioned for him to get in. I did not realize my ordeals for the day were not over yet. As he opened the door, he gave me a look and we exchanged a greeting as he squeezed into the front seat. He was going to a spot on the highway near my house, and away we went, engaging in light conversation. I glanced down at his side. I noticed he had a prosthetic arm made of a hard, heavy ballistic plastic with a metal hook for grasping instead of a hand. From the conversation, he was an out-of-work construction, heavy equipment operator whose house was undergoing a bank foreclosure. He was basically squatting illegally on his own property, probably hitchhiking around during the day to avoid the sheriff evicting him and coming back in the evening to let himself into his basement. So basically a homeless vagrant and a transient that still had a physical address. This didn't raise any red flags with me at the time, though maybe it should have. I have a repertoire of interesting stories I like to tell. I dusted one off and told him a yarn or two to pass the miles and be friendly as it makes the ride easier. He listened politely, and I found he liked to talk a bit himself. My tales must have encouraged him because he began to tell me a very strange tale of his own. He began to relate to me that years ago, during what he claimed was one of the worst blizzards of the century, in his words, a woman had a bad accident on the US route that went past his house. He said that she was badly injured from the accident and bleeding to death. His story continued, and he mentioned that the weather was so bad that the road was undrivable, but as a construction operator, he had a backhoe. He said that he loaded the injured woman into the bucket of the backhoe and drove her 30 miles through the freezing cold and blizzard to a major medical center and delivered her to the ER. That was a pretty odd tale, I thought. I am pretty street smart, having seen a lot of the world and some of the more dangerous places in it. I believe that he had changed up the story somewhat to protect the guilty. He wanted to share his story, but disguise his role or what had really happened. In other words, his story contained a kernel of truth, but he had changed a few details. I am quick to spot inconsistencies and also can analyze just as quickly. It comes with the street smarts, another word for the survival instinct. What I think is true was that a woman who was fatally injured, perhaps someone who had come to his door for help, I think that she died, and I think he used the bucket loader to bury the body. The why and wherefore I could not guess at all, but I had immediately gotten that impression. I didn't have much time to think about it as the drive was coming to an end. It may seem weird to you that I came to that conclusion, but perhaps what follows will convince you. As he ended his story, we had come to the turn for his house. As I turned into the long driveway, he had just ended his story and now began to make improper propositions to me as to what he would like to have happen amorously. I was a bit taken aback, but just simply told him politely that was not my thing and ended my conversation as we pulled up to his house, and he continued to insist. The problem was that he was not taking no as an answer. I realized things were rapidly getting out of hand, but I am a cool customer when dealing with the actual stress and danger. I'm pretty hardcore, which discourages most potential malefactors, but not this guy, which shows just how dangerous he was. He wasn't getting out of the car now that we were stopped, and he had his hard plastic arm, solid and heavy as a log raised halfway between us, looking at me straight in the eye and not saying anything. Having studied self-defense, I knew the deal. If I looked away or blinked, he would knock me out with the arm. He was formidable as well. He may have been fat, but he was a construction worker with large arms and muscles from a life of heavy work. The weight was all to his advantage in any struggle. I knew the deal though, and I always had a plan in case a hitchhiker proved to be dangerous. I had my seatbelt on and he didn't. The plan was to floor the car into his house at about 60 and put him through the windshield. Even if I was injured or unconscious myself, hopefully he would be worse. The idea was that the noise of a high-speed crash would bring neighbors to find out what happened, and I would also blare the horn. But I could see that if he went through the trouble of knocking me out for the purpose of a sexual assault, that I would likely never wake up again. Someone this dangerous was not going to leave a witness that could put him in jail for the rest of his life. Likely, he was a career criminal, and this was not his first rodeo. The other secret learned from martial arts is never look away and hold the gaze. Read the intent and spontaneously block or direct any initial attack. This guy could see from my eyes that he would have a real fight on his hands, that I was fully ready for a life or death combat. The situation ended when he opened the door and anticlimactically got out. I quickly backed out of the dooryard and spun the car around, giving him a departing glance, and headed out. Whew, I thought, that is the most dangerous motherfucker that I've ever encountered. I should really call the police station and tell them to keep an eye on that scary bitch, because it will only be a matter of time before he tries to kill somebody, and at least they will have a warning about him on their files. But, I thought, the police often don't seem to take me seriously, and he didn't do anything other than pose a threat, no actual assault. What can I do? The real reason was now that the situation was over, I just wanted to forget about it. It has been a very long day after all. A police report would take up another hour of my dinner time, and I would have to deal with possibly skeptical or unhelpful authorities. In 2020 retrospect, I see now that that was a mistake. About 10 years later, the property was the site of a very active crime scene. A woman from a nearby state had come to live at that house and had gone missing. I didn't realize that his house was the site till I drove by one day and saw a state police crime scene bus. About 5 cruisers and a police helicopter and everything marked off with crime scene tape. And then I thought, oh, I really should have let someone know. It might have prevented this. And I was lazy and concerned more with myself that day. The girl's body was later found in a local pond in a freezer that had come from that house. Dark stories of a couple exploiting a young homeless girl down on her luck emerged, and it seems other folks were involved as well. A sordid tale I won't go into here out of respect in that case her family were to read this post. I drove by a couple days later and the investigation was winding down, and only a cruiser or two were maintaining security. That's when I decided to call into the state police with the story about the backhoe that Captain Hook had told me. The next day, the crime scene was abuzz again. I suspect they were searching for other cadavers. Although the couple was never charged, they both remain in prison on other charges, the last I knew. The lesson for me was see something, say something. Oh, and hitchhikers these days are getting too damn sketchy. A man in the dark. I used to live in a rural part of the UK and had lived in rural areas most of my life, so I was used to long walks, occasionally at night, especially before I could drive. They never bothered me too much. I'd get creeped out occasionally, but this one night was the most terrifying experience I've ever had. There was this one friend. He used to live roughly 3 miles away from my house. He had cool parents, and my other friends and I would often go over to his house and play video games and hang out. Occasionally, this meant walking home at night if I stayed late. There were 2 ways back from his house. The roadway, which was about 5 miles long and took about 30 to 45 minutes. The roads were very quiet and eerie sometimes, but they were lit by street lamps, so it never bothered me walking this way. The other way was a shortcut through some woods, which took off about 2 miles, and the wooded bit was about a mile long or so. I often favored the wooded shortcut, and have probably walked it over 100 times. The woods were dark, however. Combined with the lack of ambient light due to living in a rural area, and you had absolute abyssal darkness. Luckily, most of the time, I had my phone light to walk with, but sometimes my phone would die or the battery would be slow. The flash wouldn't work and I'd have to use my screen light. As you've probably guessed by now, this was one of those occasions. My friends and I had just finished watching a film. It was nearing 10 p.m., so we all left my friend's house and headed our separate ways home. I contemplated briefly which way I should go and decided to take the shortcut through the woods. I started walking away from his house and towards the path that headed into the woods. The streetlights dimmed as I entered the fields before the woods. I glanced at my phone and saw my battery was really low. Only enough power left for a couple minutes of flash, and then I'd have to use my screen for light. That wouldn't last the whole way either. As I saw the tree line approaching, I switched on the flash and followed the well-trodden path into the dark. To my dismay, the light died within seconds of entering, and I flipped my phone over to try and shine the way using the screen. As I walked, I looked out for all of the familiar landmarks I was used to seeing to ensure I was heading in the right direction. Funky tree stump, check. Half-fallen fir tree, check. Enormous puddle I had to jump over, check. All was going well. I was halfway through the woods when my phone completely died. I remember the moment it happened. I was engulfed in darkness. I'm not sure if you've experienced this level of darkness before, but it was so dark I couldn't even see the outline of my hand centimeters in front of my face. Naturally, my pace slowed considerably, and I started holding my hand out in front of me to make sure I wasn't going to walk into a tree or something. I continued walking for another minute or so, until all of a sudden, a pungent smell hit me. Cigarette smoke. I glanced around, but couldn't see anything. And then I heard it. A cough. I wasn't alone. Thoughts raced through my head. Who would be out in the woods in the dark? Are they following me? Am I lost? I quickened my pace again, throwing a little caution to the wind. I carried on walking and tripped slightly on a branch. As I regained my balance, I heard another sound. Branches breaking underfoot, what sounded like right behind me. The snapping turned into fast footsteps that grew louder and louder. I started sprinting. I felt the well-trodden path turn to brush. I felt branches, logs, and plants hitting my legs. It wasn't long before I fell. Hard. I was lying on the floor, holding my knee. I could still hear branches snapping around me and a voice muttering something. I didn't dare move. Then, all of a sudden, they turned on a torch. I couldn't see anything except for the beam of light, which seemed to be eaten quickly by the darkness of the forest. I lay motionless on the ground as the beam swept through the trees. I could still hear the person mumbling, a deep growl. The crunching of footfalls grew and grew. They were only several feet from me by this point. I couldn't breathe. The light went out, the snapping of branches grew, and then nothing. Quiet. My eyes were wide open, but I couldn't see anything. Then I could hear wheezing right above me. I wanted to cry. I wasn't sure if the person could see me or not. They could have been staring right at me, and I wouldn't know. This carried on for about 5 minutes until the crunching of leaves and snapping of twigs started up again and got fainter and fainter as they moved away from me. I remained lying down for another 5 or 10 minutes, contemplating my escape. Like an idiot, I had ran off the path and wasn't sure which way was back to it or was home. I didn't really care, I thought. I was going to walk in one direction until I left the woods and get home from there. I knew as soon as I started moving again, if the person was still in the woods, they would hear me. Should I run or try to sneak out? I opted for the latter. I slowly rose to my feet, listening constantly to my surroundings, picked a direction, and started walking. I wasn't perfectly quiet, but quiet enough to be sure I wouldn't be heard from too far away. I kept hearing snapping sounds and rustling in the distance, and every time I froze. I'd hold my breath until I was happy no one was there and then started walking again. I repeated this pattern for what felt like an eternity until eventually I found the path. I screamed for joy in my mind and sped up my pace. After another 10 minutes, I saw it. Light. Streetlights filtering in through the trees. I'd never been so happy to see a meager street lamp. But as I progressed to the end of the woods, my heart sank. At the end of the path was a black silhouette. Unmoving, contrasted against the light background was the dark figure of a man. What should I do? Maybe it's a different person. Perhaps it's someone walking their dog. I froze and watched them silently, but they didn't move at all. They just stood there like they were guarding the entrance to the woods. I didn't know what to do. By this point, I'd had enough. I was so close to getting out, I decided to just run straight towards the exit, straight towards them. I was a 6-foot young man. If they wanted to stop me, they'd have a hard job of it. So that's what I did. I started sprinting. The figure grew and grew as I reached them. I stepped to the side. I heard someone growl, "Fuck," loudly, and felt something clip the back of my head and tug the back of my jacket. I cleared the sheep gate in one leap and sprinted into the light. I eventually stopped running when I could see the first house and looked back. The entrance to the woods was quite far away now, and I couldn't see anyone standing by the entrance. Relaxing a bit more now, I finished my walk home. That's pretty much it. I know I could have overreacted. It could have been someone out for a walk in the woods, a dog walker or camper. But what I thought was strange was that they didn't use their torch except briefly on one occasion. Once they heard me, they also actively seeked me out. Who knows what would have happened if they caught me? In any case, I never walked that way home alone again. Not at night anyway. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, please leave a like, review, or a comment. As always, the original stories are linked down in the description below, and I claim no credit for the stories themselves. Be sure to follow the show everywhere at Scary But True Pod. And if you have your own scary story that you'd like me to share, email it to me at scarybutTruePod@gmail.com. My name is Michael Messerly, and I'll see you next time with more Scary But True.